I saw him on the River Tour, the 2016 River Tour in Rome at Circus Maximus, among all the ruins in Rome, and I'm standing in the pit like I'm in the middle of the Roman, the Forum in Rome, playing, and he opens up with New York City Serenade, which was the first time he did that before he did that for the rest of the tour, and just hearing the strings and the passion of the Italian fans. The rest of the show was great, but it was just that atmosphere that was just put it over the top. And it was the same, and I highly recommend seeing him in San Siro in Milan. The crowd there is just nuts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Joining me an early morning for him is Giacomo. John, welcome to the show.
Jesse, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, I am so excited to visit with you. I know you live in San Francisco. You work a little bit in the sports business. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
That's correct. I live in San Francisco. I work for NBC Sports Bay Area. I'm the executive producer. We're basically the local sports channel here that have all the Bay Area teams. Been out here in San Francisco since 2009, and originally grew up in Harrison, New York, which is a small town in the suburbs, about 25 minutes north of New York City. Been out here, like I said, since 2009. So love California, miss New York, but California is definitely better.
San Francisco is just an amazing city, filled with so many. The first time we went years ago, like in the 90s, my wife said, "Oh, it's a clean New Orleans."
There you go. Yep.
It has that atmosphere and it has that feeling. So very nice. Well, I always like to start at the beginning. So talk about growing up there in the New York area. What kind of music did your family listen to? What kind of music did you listen to as a kid?
So there was always music in our house. My mom always had the radio on in the kitchen, and she listened to WNEW AM, which was a big band station. So there was a lot of Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett. There was the show that was on in the afternoon was called the Make Believe Ballroom. So somewhat like Bruce's mom in the, having the radio on in the kitchen in the morning, the radio was always on in our house. So there was always music. My sisters, I'm the youngest of four. So my sisters were listening to Elton John and Carly Simon and James Taylor, the singer-songwriters in the early 70s. As far as music taste for myself, I was listening to a lot of Led Zeppelin and Jethro Tull, and Southern rock was also big at that time with Leonard Skinner and the Outlaws and Charlie Daniels Band. So pretty much a wide mix of music, also top 40 at that time as well. It was a lot of heavy metal, a lot of Black Sabbath as well, a lot of Ted Nugent. Excuse me. So it was a wide mix of music, but music was always a part of my life growing up.
Did you embrace the music of your mom and your parents? Did you enjoy that, or did you go through a spell where you rebelled, or you just kind of was able to juggle both loves?
I'm not sure if I rebelled against it. Some of the music that they listened to wasn't my kind of music. There was some Mitch Miller sing-along type of music. I came to appreciate Sinatra a lot later in life, when as I got older, and actually got a chance to see him years and years ago. So always appreciated that, and always appreciated that kind of music.
Yeah.
And appreciate it today. I mean, when you see somebody like Tony Bennett playing with Lady Gaga at this point, it's amazing. You know, he was still singing it, but 95 years old. It's crazy.
Gives us hope for Bruce.
Exactly.
Yeah, you know that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I see there, an 85-year-old Bruce doing an hour and a half show, which would feel like, like a walk in the park for him.
Yep.
Compared to what
Yep.
we did. Yeah. So John, when did you discover Bruce? And if you can, tell us what about his music spoke to you.
I would say I discovered Bruce first on the radio after Born to Run came out. So, in 1975, actually had Born to Run on an 8-track. I don't know if you remember way back when Columbia House used to have get eight tracks for like 3 cents or whatever it was. So Born to Run was one of the first 8 tracks that I ever had. So I would say around 75, WNEW FM in New York City was a huge Springsteen radio station with all the folks around there like Dave Herman and Scott Muni and Carol Miller at night. Always playing a lot of Bruce. So that's how I was introduced to Bruce, I would say. I think the thing that really made me a huge fan was the same station, WNEW FM in 1978. Broadcast the Agora show from Cleveland. And I actually recorded that on an 8-track and then changed that over to a cassette and basically wore it out. And that was really when I was like, wow, this is something cool. This is something special. Because again, at that point, I hadn't seen him yet. So it was just through the magic of that show that I really became a Bruce fan. And obviously Darkness came out at that point as well. And that was also on an 8-track. So I would say, like I said, through the radio in 75 and then through that concert at the Agora through the radio as well, is when I was really introduced to Bruce.
About how old are you at this time?
In 1978, I am 16 years old.
Okay. Very nice. When you discovered this, by the way, I graduated high school in 77, so I was an 8-track kid, very much so as well.
Sure.
Did you go and look for back catalog? Were you, I remember when I first discovered the Beach Boys in 77, like every time I went into a record store, I went straight to the B's and was flipping through Beach Boy albums, or in this case 8-tracks, going, do I have this one yet? Oh, I don't. Okay, let me pick it up.
I did do that. I did that actually when the River came out, which was the fall of 1980, is when I went away to college. And that's really when I went into the back catalog and went and looked for Greetings and went and looked for The Wild and the Innocent. Darkness was really the first Bruce album that I bought on vinyl, and then The River, and then Born to Run, because again, I had it on 8-track, and then The Wild and the Innocent, and then Greetings after that. So I was lucky enough when I got to college, I met a bunch of folks that were Bruce fans, and there was one guy whose nickname was Buzzy, who actually had a number of bootleg shows. So I had a number of bootlegs before I had some of the actual, official releases, which was, just listening to the shows was just amazing at that point, because it was something that was so new, because he hadn't put out a live album at that point. And like I said, I hadn't seen him. So just listening to the shows along with the albums themselves was just what really turned me into a fan.
So I'm going to go into young people don't know how good they have it now mode. So I apologize in advance, but I can imagine 18, 19-year-old John, the thought of having an official release every month of a live show in good quality sound, you could not have imagined, right? Like this
Never.
Would have been, yeah.
Never. And he was so protective of everything he did. And and listen, he wanted to put out the best stuff that he had, and I totally understand that. But what's going on recently with all of the releases? I mean, it's just amazing to get these shows in high quality. Like I said, I mean, the Agora show, I started out on an 8-track and then transferred that to cassette, where you still heard when you went from track 1 to track 2 on an 8-track, and you heard that little change. I mean, that was on the cassette.
Sure, absolutely.
But now it's in pristine listening condition, and it's just amazing.
What cracks me up is back then, and there were certain 8-tracks you bought that were commercial 8-tracks. These were not homemade, where there were 4 tracks, and between like track 2 and track 3, you would hear half a song, and then the second half of the song would be on the next track. So the middle, I'd be like, you're like, how did we put up with that? Why, who person is sound engineer thought, oh, this is a good idea. We can't, let's figure out a way to do this. That's hilarious.
Absolutely. You are correct.
Yeah. Where'd you go to school?
I went to school at SUNY Geneseo. It was a state school. Geneseo was in upstate New York between Rochester and Buffalo.
Okay.
Which obviously was a pretty big Springsteen area. So school was, I was on the radio stations in school. I was on the TV stations in school. So when I was DJing, there was a lot of Bruce being played during those shows. So it was great. That was the first kind of Bruce community that I found. Growing up in high school, some of my friends liked Bruce, but it wasn't, it was more, like I said, more of the heavy metal, more of the Southern rock type music.
Were you majoring in whatever version of radio and TV that university had? Okay.
Yep, I was majoring in communications and public relations. So it was all, like I said, working at the 2 radio stations, working at the TV station, and playing a lot of music when I could during those shows.
Why did you pick that major?
So I've always wanted to be in the television business. When I was growing up and people were playing, pee-wee football and midget football, I wasn't playing. I was actually announcing the games for our local town. So, I mean, Marv Albert, when I grew up, was on the local NBC station doing sports at 6:00 every night. And I grew up a Rangers and Knicks and Giants and Yankees fan. So listening, and Marv Albert was the voice of the Rangers and the Knicks back then. So I was always interested in sports, always wanted to get into that business somehow. And with television, I started out in radio and then moved into TV. So something I've always wanted to do. So I've been lucky to be able to do that for my career.
When you said you started out in radio, were you doing sportscast? Did talk radio? What all did you do for the radio stations?
So in college radio, you basically get a chance to do everything, which was great. So I was a newscaster, I was a sportscaster, then I got my own music show. And then I moved up in my senior year. I was actually program director of the FM station at college. And again, Bruce was always part of those shows.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether people wanted to hear it or not. So, it was a great opportunity actually to discover other artists and discover new music. Because at college radio, you were always getting, free music to play, and you're getting bands that maybe you had never heard of. And it just opened the door to other types of music that I hadn't heard before.
When you graduated, what was your first gig?
So when I graduated from college, I was working a 6 a.m. until 11 a.m. Sunday morning show at a local station in the town next to the town where I went to college. It was in Danville, New York. Very small station. I mean, you basically walked in, you turned on the lights yourself, you turned on all the equipment yourself. And then Sunday mornings, there was obviously some religious programs before I got to play music. I was doing that once a week, and then I was also working part-time at a what used to be called an oldie station in Geneva, New York. So Radio was the first gig. I was in radio for probably 10 years and bounced around, worked in upstate New York, worked closer to home. Then I worked in Cape Cod and Boston in Massachusetts, and then moved into television after that.
Okay, very nice. What was the first gig on TV?
First gig in TV was as a reporter for a station in Manchester, New Hampshire. So covering news for them while I was still on the radio as a news director, one of the stations in Nashua, New Hampshire. So that was the first television gig. And
how did you move? And I promise, guys, we're going to get back to Bruce, but I'm always fascinated by this. When did you move over to full-time sports?
So after I was in Nashua, New Hampshire, I moved to Utica, New York to work for the ABC station there. And I was the 6 and 11 anchor, and that was all just straight news. And I got the opportunity to move to Washington, D.C. To work on Capitol Hill and cover politics, which I did during the Clinton administration and all through the impeachment hearings and Monica Lewinsky, and covering that every day. And that's when I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to do something that's fun.
I would think that was we're watching the impeachment, the FX series, American Crime, and you're like, wow, gosh, this is just there are no good people on any side of this, and I realize it's a fictional story, but you're like, there's no hero I'm pulling for.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I was chasing senators and congressmen down the halls of Congress, asking them about, Monica Lewinsky and all this. I mean, it was out of control. So I just looked at it and was like, this isn't fun. This isn't what I want to do for the rest of my life. And at the time, I was also doing a sports show in Washington, D.C. I was a reporter for them. So I just explored the sports side of it, and I've been doing that. Oh my God, I've been doing that for the last 20 years or so at this point.
Do you miss covering New York teams? Or with San Francisco, the beauty of that city and the idea that there are, I imagine there's a passionate fan base there in San Francisco as well that scratches that itch.
I mean, that's a great question. I would love to be able to cover, the New York Giants and the Rangers and the Yankees. But San Francisco, we are really busy out here with the Warriors and the A's and the Giants and the 49ers and the Sharks and the Sacramento Kings. So there are a lot of teams to cover here. We're probably the busiest regional network in the country. So, and you're pulling for those teams because, you work with them, but, I'm still a fan of the New York teams. And I think living in San Francisco as opposed to living in New York, tilts the scales to San Francisco.
Yeah. Do you focus mostly on the San Francisco teams, or do you cover a few of the other California teams as well?
No, it's mostly San Francisco. It's definitely the Bay Area. I mean, we do a little Stanford and Cal as well, the college teams, but not as much as we did in the past. Like I said, I mean, they have teams in every single league, so we're always busy.
It keeps you busy. Absolutely. Very nice.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. So I always like to preface this, John, when the amount of times you've seen Bruce perform live is not a fair barometer of how big of a fan you are. Depending on your age, your economic situation, where you live drives your thing. So talk to me about the first show you went to, and do you count how many times have you seen him perform live?
So the first show that I saw was on November 28th, 1980 at Madison Square Garden in New York. It was on the River Tour. My then girlfriend and I did not have tickets. We scalped outside of Madison Square Garden.
Okay.
I think the face value of the ticket was $9. And we paid $75 for the 2 tickets. And they were in what we used to be called the blue seats in Madison Square Garden. They're the highest up you can be. They were behind the stage in the corner.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have been more excited. was like I'm in the building. That's all that matters at this
That's it.
point. Because, you know, the demand at that point, and again, this is dating us, you had to mail in requests for tickets at that point. And it was just, the post office was overwhelmed and, you know, it was just crazy. So just to get into the building was amazing. And, you know, he opened up with Prove It All Night. And by 10th Avenue Freeze Out, he was up on the piano, and it was just amazing to see. So that was the first show. Since then, I've seen 223 shows, which sounds crazy, but it's something that has given me the opportunity to travel all over this country. It's given me the opportunity to travel all over the world and just see things and see cities and see places that I never would have went to. So I think not only seeing the shows, but just the experiences and meeting people from all over the world has really, you know, been a big part of my life. So that's really been the fun part of it. It really got crazy during the reunion tour. I saw 58 shows, I think it was, on the reunion tour.
Wow.
Along with the, you know, the holiday shows that year. So that's when the traveling really took off. And like I said, I've been doing it ever since. And the biggest part, I know a lot of Bruce fans that travel a lot and then they just go to see the show and they don't experience the city or the food or the culture. You know, they're just worried about them going to the show. You know, I want to get online and all that kind, which is great, you know, whatever you want to do. But I enjoy traveling and food and, you know, and checking out different cultures and stuff. So that's been the biggest and the most fun, biggest thing and the most fun of all the traveling.
So John, I'm going to talk about shows, but once again, you've tweaked my other interests. What are cities where you go, yes, he's going there, that means I get to go do this?
Nashville's a great city here in the US. Obviously New Orleans, which he hasn't played in a long time except for the Jazz Fest, is always a fun city to go to. I mean, obviously he's going to play Philadelphia, and the shows are always strong in Philadelphia. You know, in the United States, you know, obviously living here in California, he's going to play LA. But I would say Nashville's always a fun town. I mean, I've seen him in Dallas. We always have a good time in Dallas. Love barbecue.
Yeah.
And you know, I'd like to see him play in New Orleans a little bit more than he does just with the Jazz Fest, because that's a tremendous city, probably my favorite city in the country. And you know, I was lucky enough during the River Tour to see him in Europe in a number of cities, and you know, Barcelona and Milan are just, you know, the Bruce fan bases there, and the cities themselves are amazing, and saw him in Rome as well. So always excited when he's playing anywhere.
Yeah.
You know, if he was playing out in the street somewhere, really wouldn't matter. So those are really the top cities.
Yeah. I tell this story to kind of make fun of myself, but James Taylor and Jackson Browne were playing here in Fort Worth, and there were no tickets except on the scalping market. And so I started looking, and New Orleans had tickets on a Saturday night and they had not sold out. So I went to my wife and I said, well, this maybe seemed dumb, but instead of paying scalper tickets, do you want to go buy regular price tickets and we'll go to New Orleans and make a long weekend out of it? Sure. She's like, yeah. So because I didn't want to pay $300 a ticket, I ended up spending a couple of grand, right? but we got to, you know, we flew in, and you know, we got to spend a weekend in New Orleans, and you know, we ate a lot of good food and got to see, you know, some of the sights, and you know, New Orleans is one of our favorite cities, so it was really good to be back there. And it ended up being a cold front. So usually New Orleans is hot and sticky, and in this case it wasn't. So it was really nice. So yeah, I'm always tempted when I see him at Jazz Fest. The couple of times he's played, like, oh man, you could squeeze in. It would be nice for him to play at that arena, and then you could kind of see a show. That would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've been lucky enough to go to Jazz Fest and see him there twice.
Yeah.
And just the whole experience of being there and just how important music is to that city.
Yeah.
And just seeing how people embrace him, because I mean, obviously Jazz Fest has changed so much over the years where it's, more of a, there's a lot of bigger, more headliners that are more rock and roll. But just to see the way that the city embraces them, and you could definitely tell he genuinely enjoys playing there.
Yeah. Yeah. That first show after Katrina, I know they've released most of it on YouTube, but
Mm-hmm.
I wish they would actually, and I realize it's a short set because it's a festival, but I would
Yep.
love for that to be on a Blu-ray or DVD, or
Yep.
even, on demand, because I would love to see it all in one piece versus as I'm trying to do YouTube going pick with this song,
Sure.
pick this song, this song. Um,
Sure.
it seems that and I've talked to a couple of people that attended those shows, and they said they were very emotional,
Yep.
and that the city kind of appreciated the fact that someone of his magnitude there singing the way he sang and what he did. It does seem like a beautiful experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that'll come out soon, right?
Yeah, that would be nice. Tell me, how about some other, by the way, I was at Nashville um, during the High Hopes tour. And
Yep.
I agree, it was a great show. I love Nashville.
Yep.
It's a fun city to go to regardless, just because there's
Absolutely.
music everywhere.
Yep.
So you can go into any. My brother-in-law was able to get us Bluebird Cafe tickets.
Nice.
And yeah, that was really nice. They had 4 musicians that were in the round, and I was just amazed at just the amount of music we got to see and hear. Um, what are other favorite, what are other shows or memories with stories you want to share?
I would say my favorite show of all time, and it's hard to pick one
Sure.
because the funny thing is, there are great shows, and then there are great experiences, and then there are shows where you heard this one song and you're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm
Yeah.
hearing this song," and the rest of the show could be a great show, but not as good as some other shows. But I would, if I had to pick one, on the Born in the USA tour, he played in Buffalo, New York, at the old Buffalo Odd. It was in September. He played 2 nights. I tried to go to the first night. I didn't have tickets. I couldn't get in. And I was standing outside with my then girlfriend, and he started playing Born in the USA, which you could hear outside. And I was so upset that we couldn't get into the show because ticket prices were so high at that point and demand was so high. We drove back. I drove back to Geneseo, which was about an hour drive just in silence. And I was determined to go the next night and get in, which we did, luckily. And that show, he was still doing an intermission at that point. So with the intermission, it was like 4 hours and 15 minutes, and there was no air conditioning in the Buffalo Odd. It was sweltering.
Oh no.
And it was just an amazing performance. And I had some friends from college that had never seen him before, and I kept saying, "You got to come to the show." And they weren't sitting with us, but they saw the show, and they've been fans ever since. But at the end of the show, he plays the Detroit medley and Twist and Shout, and he's drenched. And he goes, "It's a little early for this one, and the meteorological atmosphere isn't quite right, but we're going to play it anyway." And he started playing Santa Claus, which was the first time I heard that song. The place just went crazy. And just the energy in the building. Buffalo's, one of the cities that, at that point is, especially, unemployment was high. It was a tough time for a lot of folks. And I think they really appreciated the effort that he put out. So that was a great show. What was a great show and a great experience is on the Rising tour at the Link in Philadelphia. He played 3 nights in August. And it was August 11th. And a buddy who I had met in the parking lot of the Meadowlands during the reunion tour, we were in the lottery for the GA, and we're looking at each other. We've been standing there for a couple of hours, and he looks at me and he goes, "If we don't get in the pit, we'll just go get cheesesteaks." And I was like, "Okay, sounds like a plan." And they pulled the number, and we were the second and third number to walk into the stadium. So we were standing in front of Bruce and Stevie the whole night, and that's the night he started with From Small Things and played Incident, played Pretty Flamingo for the first time in 20-something years. It was an amazing. It was Howling at the Moon during Ramrod. So that was an amazing experience, along with an amazing show. I was lucky enough to see the birthday show on the Philly Spectrum. When he came out with the boombox and he played the recording of the phone message and started with "Growing Up," which is one of my favorite songs. So that was a tremendous experience. But there's other, there are experiences like the first time I saw a show in Barcelona, and I highly recommend if anyone has never seen Bruce in Spain or Italy, it's a whole nother type of experience. And we were in the pit in Barcelona, and you're basically getting moved around by the crowd without even moving. Like it's a little scary, but they're so passionate and so into it. And it was so hot. And it was the first night of the tour, so didn't know what to expect. So that was more of an experience than just the set list itself. And I think that the ultimate experience, I was lucky enough to go to Australia for a bunch of shows on the Wrecking Ball tour.
Oh, how good for you.
And yeah, I flew halfway across the world. I hate to fly, by the way. I travel a lot and I hate to fly. And I went to Australia. I knew one other guy that was going, and I met a bunch of people down there, still friends with, spent 3 weeks in Australia, traveling around the country and seeing shows. And the last night in Melbourne in March of, I think it was 2013, the night before, stayed up all night because we had GA tickets to do the GA check-in, was up all night and standing in line all day, and got right up front, right in the middle. And then, during Born to Run, he comes down and he puts the guitar out, and we were playing the guitar, which is just,
sure.
It's amazing. It was like whatever else was going on at that point. It was just like the guitar's in front of you, and he's standing there with the guitar in front of you. It's like, oh my God, I'm playing the guitar. Not myself. I mean, everybody else was,
sure,
playing it as well. So, and that set list was great, but, was the greatest set list show that I've ever seen? No, but the experience was unbelievable, so it's funny when, like I said, when you look at shows, it's like, what was the experience? What was the set list? And people are always looking at set lists like, oh, this wasn't a strong show, or that wasn't a strong show. And yeah, there's songs that you'd rather hear him play and not play, but I look at it as, it's the whole experience. Who are you with? How was the city? What else did you see? I mean, perfect example of that is I saw him on the River Tour, the 2016 River Tour in Rome at Circus Maximus. Among all the ruins in Rome, and I'm standing in the pit, like I'm in the middle of the Roman, the Forum in Rome, and he's playing, and he opens up with New York City Serenade, which was the first time he did that, before he did that for the rest of the tour.
Right.
And just hearing the strings and the passion of the Italian fans. The rest of the show was great, but it was just that atmosphere that was just put it over the top. And it was the same in, I highly recommend seeing him in San Siro in Milan. The crowd there is just nuts.
Yeah.
And I'm Italian. I'm 100% Italian. And so I relate to them, but just, singing every single word, singing parts of the music, it's just an amazing experience.
Yeah. So John, I'll kind of put it's not fair to compare things, but I'm going to ask you to anyway. You obviously love sports. Is there been live sporting events that have been close to giving you the joy of going to a Bruce show?
That's a great question. The only one that I could say is in 1994, when the New York Rangers were on their Stanley Cup march. I was lucky enough to be at Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals against the New Jersey Devils. And the Rangers were winning that game 1-0 the whole game. And with like 8 seconds left, I think it was 8 seconds, might have been even less than that. The Devils scored the tie, and the whole Garden at that point was yelling, "We want the cup, we want the cup," because the Rangers hadn't won in 54 years at that point.
Wow.
And it was the curse that was going on.
Sure.
And 1 minute you're like, "Oh my God, we're going to the Stanley Cup Finals," and the next minute, it's tied, and the place just went dead silent. Just shock. And then the game went into double overtime. And it's a famous call in hockey, Matteau, because Stefan Matteau scored the game-winning goal for the Rangers. And the place just exploded, and you're hugging people you don't even know, and people are going crazy. I mean, that's the greatest sporting event I've ever been to, and I've been to World Series and Super Bowls and championships. And that was amazing, but there's nothing that beats the lights going off, the show's about to start, even if you know what he's going to play, just that rush.
Sure.
That's tough to beat. And then at the end of the night, you're just like drenched, and it's just, there's so many highs and lows of that show. It's the same thing as a sporting event.
Absolutely.
But there's just that, just seeing the band and that euphoria of the music and the camaraderie of the fans and stuff, it's just a different high. And sports, listen, a lot of people are huge sports fans and they get that high going to games. But I get it more going to Bruce concerts.
Absolutely. How over the past couple of years with the pandemic, how's it been covering sports? I mean, what did you guys do when everything was shut down, and what and how nervous were you when things started opening up, and the NBA was in the bubble, there's no one in the stands. Talk to me a little bit about that.
It was obviously different. We're all living in a different world now.
Absolutely.
And it made us rethink the way that you cover sports. I mean, the old way, quote unquote old way, is you had a live truck at the facility, and you had a crew in the live truck, and they were covering the game. You had people inside the arena. You couldn't do any of that. So you had to rethink things where the folks that were in our live trucks would be back in our office. And you're trying to socially distance people that are in a control room that is not very big, but there's 4 or 5 to 6 people in a control room. So it made us rethink the way that you would cover sports. Obviously your crew would always travel to the games, which was not being done anymore. And it's still not being done in a lot of cases. I mean, things have returned, but not 100% returned in the way that TV is covering sports. So it just made you rethink of everything. It was completely weird to go to a stadium with no one in the stadium when the games are going on, and then to see it come back, bit by bit. But then it was also strange to be in a full stadium and just, have that little bit of anxiety, even though you're vaccinated and you hope everybody else is, and just being like, is this safe? Because to be honest, do we really know?
Yeah, sure.
So it's definitely changed the way that television is covering sports. And I think some for the better, some for the worse, but we'll see what happens as we move forward and hopefully get out of this pandemic eventually. But it definitely made us rethink how you could cover sports, because with no fans in the stands, it's amazing how that takes away from the game. We actually talked to a bunch of Bruce friends, actually friends. Yeah. It was like, will there ever be, a GA pit anymore? Will there, because if you look at the band, I mean, they're all up there in age,
Yes.
and you don't want to, God forbid, there's a show and they got sick and that kind of thing. So we all were talking about that, like, what would a concert look like, if they came back? Is there going to be a GA pit? Is there going to be, we have to show, that you're vaccinated and all that kind of stuff. So, I think, Bruce and his folks are being cautious, and I think they should be. And it's not really worth going out if people are going to get sick. So
I agree, John.
Hopefully, we're moving in the right direction, and we'll see them on the road in 2022. It would have been nice to see them, this year or last year, whenever thought about going out, but I think they're doing the right thing.
Did you go to either run of Broadway?
So I saw him on Broadway. It was funny, and they do this all the time. It's like, hey, we're only gonna be there for 6 weeks. Get your tickets now. So
Yeah.
Got tickets for the first couple of weeks. Went in October in the first run. Saw him 2 other times the following year, and then just went back to New York in August and saw it 2 nights in a row, which was a very strange experience, being in a theater fully masked. With people, and again, thank God they were doing that, going around and making sure people had masks on and showing your vax card. It was still emotional. It was still a great show. And it was nice to see him change a few things up, but it was that was the first time I've traveled since the pandemic. So it was the whole, being on a plane, going to New York City, with all the folks there, and being in a theater with a mask on. Was a strange thing, but the flip side of that is I saw a number of people I hadn't seen in years, which was always great.
Yeah. Let's talk a few minutes about Letter to You and Western Stars. What are your thoughts?
Western Stars, when it first came out, I knew this was something that he had been talking about. I've got this Grand Canyon music and this Western themed music. So I wasn't surprised when it came out. And I look at it this way, is like, he's earned the right to do whatever the hell he wants at this point.
Well said.
And God bless him for doing it. There's something if I had my choice, it would always be the E Street Band. I mean, I've seen him, on all of his solo tours. I've seen him, whatever he's put out, with the Seeger Sessions Band. And I think most fans would agree with that. But if this is what he wants to do, and he makes him happy, and it keeps the creative juices flowing, God bless him. And they're just like anything else. There's songs on Western Stars that I think are really good. Tucson Train, I think, is really good. Western Stars is really good, and there's a bunch of them. Letter to You is just, that's the E Street Band. That's the sound of the E Street Band, which they hadn't done like that type of music or that sound in a number of albums. So it was great to see them do that. It was also great just to watch the film and see them collaborate like they used to, and just really do it off the cuff. I think Ghost is a tremendous song. I'm predicting that as the tour opener, whenever that happens, God willing. The rest of that album is really, really strong. And it's amazing that was a year ago already.
Yeah.
But definitely, if you look at some stuff that he had put out, and I think Working on a Dream was a little bit of a weaker album. High Hopes was a little bit of a weaker album. So it was nice to see both of those, a few years later. They were pretty strong.
Yeah, the emotional being at the end of this year of where everything has just gone to heck in a handbasket, to be able to get a new Bruce album that just was what there's a new album, and to hear that. I think, as you talked about, John, a little bit, there's the set list and there's the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And the context of Letter to You puts it in my, whether you call it top 5 or top 10 experience, the joy of getting a new album with the context of when we're doing it, versus if I was a clinical person, maybe I wouldn't rank it as high compared to, Darkness or Born to Run or The Rising or other things. But in context, you're just like, God, this is what a treat.
Right, what a treat. That's a perfect way to describe it. It was a treat. And like I said, seeing the film and just seeing them, collaborating after all this time, and seeing that they genuinely like each other, which is not always the case in bands, especially if you've been together for so long. So I think the word treat is you hit it right on the head, and to have that come out and to have a number of songs on there that are really strong. And again, can't wait to hear some of those things live. And again, God willing, hopefully that'll happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So John, is there, yeah, and just a comment, not necessarily a question, but there, one of the things that you cover, I'm sure your team, as you're covering, is what is team chemistry and how important is it, right? Like
Yep.
there could be teams that are so talented that can't stand each other, but they're able to put aside their differences and play well,
Yep.
right? Then there's other people that because of their chemistry and their teamwork, they rise themselves above. It was neat to see the E Street Band all sitting there with their pencils and legal pads as he's doing this, and
Yep.
to see little Steven, well, why don't we try this? Why do we do that? And you go, gosh, there's Silvio talking
Yep.
to Tony. I mean, because he's
Yep.
always said, right, like he based his relationship playing in The Sopranos on what he did with Bruce.
Yep.
So it was very cool to see that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I've been lucky enough to meet just about everybody in the band, over the years, and they couldn't have been nicer, couldn't have been friendlier. And the funny thing is, like, Steve Van Zandt is just what you see is what you get. That's
Right.
That's not an act.
Right.
That's who he is, and Max couldn't have been nicer, and Niels and Roy and Gary. And so, and it's listen, I work in sports, and I've worked with athletes for years and years and years, and, fans worship athletes, and then you see them, outside of the spotlight, and some of them are jerks, and it you kind of get disappointed. Like, I think, so it's always the quote of, you're afraid to meet your heroes because you're afraid if they're going to let you down. And I've seen it where people are like, oh my God, this guy is great, and I wish I could meet him. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy's he's kind of a jerk. But I would never say that to somebody. It's like,
Right.
let them think what they want. But behind the scenes, you see, this guy's not as nice as you think, or whatever. And like I said, lucky enough to meet them, and that was never the case. I got a chance to meet Bruce a couple of times, and couldn't have been nicer, and it was just amazing. But it's always nice to see that, where it's like, you spent your life following this band, and they're not jerks.
That is nice to hear. Any specific stories about meeting any of them? Any funny incidents or anything that's worth sharing?
So the Bruce stories are pretty funny, and it was kind of like, this is never going to happen kind of thing. So the first time, it wasn't really meeting him. We were kind of stalking outside of the Landmark Theater in Syracuse on the Ghost of Tom Joad tour. So it was November of '96. So it was cold out. So we're waiting for him to come out of the car. And there wasn't a lot of people behind the theater because, again, it was, November in Syracuse, New York. It was cold. There was snow on the ground. And, he came out, he shook his hand, and of course, you're trying to think of what you're going to say the whole time. And, when he came up to me, I was just like, and I had seen him the night before in Buffalo. And I was like, hey, great show in Buffalo last night. He just looked at me like, thanks, yeah, I really appreciate it. But I was just like, and then he, moved on. I was like, that was the stupidest thing you could have said, because he's only heard it 1,000 million times.
Right.
And then the second time was on the reunion tour. We were in Austin, Texas, and he played at the Frank Irwin Center. And so the show was over, and we happened to be towards the side of where they were in the back of the arena. And we saw a bunch of people standing around there. We're like, what's going on? So we walked back down there. Excuse me. There was probably 10 or 15 people all together. And we're all just standing around. This white van is slowly coming by us. And the van stops, and the side door rolls back, and he's standing there. He's like, come on. And I had a 35 millimeter film camera at that point. I was with my then girlfriend and our friends of ours, another couple. And one by one, people were going to come up, they're going to get an autograph, get a picture, whatever. And I think the Austin paper at that time was the Statesman, I think.
Yes, that's correct.
Correct. So there was one like on the ground that I saw because I had nothing for him to sign. So I had picked that up, and my buddy and his wife, go up, they shake his hand, they take a great picture with him in the middle. They talk a little bit, he signed something. And then my girlfriend went up, took a picture. So then I handed her my camera, and Bruce, walked up to Bruce. I said, "Hey man, it was a great show. Great to meet you. Your music means all the world to me. Can you sign this?" And he signs it. So she took a picture of him signing the newspaper, with me standing next to him. And then he puts his arm around me. We go to take a picture, and the camera's not working.
Oh no.
And you can see her, she's clicking it, and nothing is happening. And it felt like I was there, for a half an hour. It was all about 30 seconds. But he says to me in my ear, he goes, "I could feel my life passing me by." I was like, oh my God. I'm so sorry, right? So never got that picture. And I was just like, no. I have the picture of us, where he's signing something, we're both looking at it. So that was great. And then on the Rising tour, I went up to Canada and saw shows in Vancouver and Calgary and Edmonton. We were outside the hotel in Edmonton, and he was coming out. I had the same camera. You'd think I would learn, but I didn't. And I was by myself, and there were a couple of people out there, and I handed my camera to a younger fellow, and he thought it was a digital camera. So instead of putting it up to his face to take the picture, he held it out like this. And so as he's doing that, and Bruce has got his arm around me, and I'm like, no. And that's when he snapped the picture. So I look like a total idiot, like this face of like, no, don't do that, And Bruce, he's got his arm around me like, who is this idiot? Like, what's going on? So I was like, well, that's 0 for 2. It's never going to happen. And then luckily, when he did the book signing tour, I think that was in 2016, my sister, who's a huge fan as well, she was lucky enough to score tickets to his book signing in Portland. So we went up that day, waited in line for a long time, and got up to meet him. And the funny thing is, they were like, you can take one picture with him. And I had my phone, and the young lady that had my phone, God bless her, from when I started walking up to where he was to the whole exchange, she was just taking pictures, and when she handed me my phone, I was like, oh my God, there's like 20 pictures here. And I walked up, and, I said, "Hey, Bruce, Johnny G, great to meet you. Is it right if I give you a hug?" And so we hugged, and I said to him again, I said, "Your music has meant the world to me. I've traveled all over the world. I've seen you over 200 times." And he's just going, "Yeah, man, I appreciate that." Like, what's he gonna say? Like he's heard it a million times, But he had a big smile on his face, and we took pictures. So I guess the third time was the charm, because the first two were just like, what is going on?
So I'm laughing for great stories, but I'm thinking, I'm a huge, the local sports station here in Dallas is The Ticket.
Yep.
Right. And one of the things they'll do is when they'll talk about someone rushing for X amount of yards, and they'll go, "Look out that window." You can see a ton of people. I just picture Bruce going, "Look out that window." You know how many people have seen 200 shows and like, "Oh, I'd be crushed." Right? Like,
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Like, again, what is he going to say? He's like, "Hey, man, I appreciate it." He goes, "Thank you. It's great to meet you." And again, I'm one of 1,000 people he's meeting that day, but again, couldn't be more gracious. And,
that's
a
a
smile
great
on
story.
his face, and really appreciates that people, have spent their lives following his music.
I often think of, speaking of, Norm Hitzges is, Texas Hall of Fame radio announcer, has been doing talk radio here in Dallas as long as I can remember. I moved to Dallas in 86, 6, and he was doing morning drive sports talk, um and he tells the story that if you talk to Nolan Ryan about his no hitters, his eyes will glaze over and he will be polite,
Yep.
but but you ask him about the home runs he's hit,
There you
his
go.
eyes will sparkle and he
Yep.
will tell stories, right?
Yep.
And I always think of that when, like, when I had Maureen Van Zant joining me. I was lucky enough to have her on
Right.
the show,
Nice.
and I had Vinny on, and I
Nice.
thought of, like, okay, what are the questions they're tired of hearing, right? Like, what do I need to ask them so that they will maybe enjoy the conversation more than just, and you're right, most people are very polite, most people will be
Yep.
like, yes, uh they're going to answer the question, like, sure, let's, whatever the celebrity or whatever, let's talk about that,
Yep.
so yeah, I always think of that. So, but it's what you want to tell them.
Correct.
I get it, how else do you, and I'm sure in his mind he appreciates hearing someone saying your music has been the soundtrack to my life. Thank you. That's good to hear. Doesn't matter
Absolutely.
because it's sincere for them.
Absolutely. And it's funny. It's like, again, working in sports, I've had a chance to meet a lot of famous people. And, when we left that book signing, my sister was with me. She obviously was ecstatic and excited. And we went out to lunch, after that, and I was shaking in the restaurant. I was just like, it was amazing, and again, I've been in locker rooms all, for different sports and in front of, well-known athletes and stuff, and that never happened. So it's just like, it was just an amazing experience. And it just, again, like I said, it's nice to see that these folks are nice.
Yeah, that is good.
And they're genuine. And I think that's what comes across when they're on the stage, and you're
Yes.
looking up at them and they're genuinely, listen, they played Born to Run a million times, but they still seem like they're having a good time when they're playing Born to Run, and they still seem like they enjoy what they're doing. And yes, if you're on the road for over a year and a half, yes, it gets old. Yes, it gets tiring for them, but you'd never know that when you're watching a show.
When the second River tour, that was right after David Bowie had died, Glenn Frey died,
Yep.
Prince died during that tour.
Yep.
And it to me, that looked like a group of musicians that go, the road in front of us is shorter than the road behind us.
Yep.
And we do not know how many more times we will have this chance
Correct.
to play together. So we are going to enjoy every moment.
Correct. It's kind of like what Joe DiMaggio said, the old Yankee. He was like, why do you always play so hard and why do you always give 100%? He's like, there could be somebody that shows up to a game that's never seen me play before. And I think, obviously when Bruce was younger, he had nothing else but music. So he'd play for 3.5, 4 hours because the rest of his life was screwed up. He was trying to figure it out. But now it's just the joy of being with these people, and I think, and I think he realized when they weren't together for a long time, that was both good and bad for everybody.
Yes.
Everybody grew up and everybody matured and everybody realized how special what they had and what they have is. And they appreciate it more. And obviously, as you get older, you appreciate things a lot more. And from the reunion tour on, and that's why I've been traveling so much. It's just like, you never know when is the last time, God forbid, that this is going to happen, and I was at the show, in Tampa when after Danny died, which was a hugely emotional show for everybody. And it's just, life is short. You never know. So
yeah, exactly.
Enjoy it and take advantage of it when you can. So that's like saying, God willing, in 2022, hopefully, they'll be out on the road again and get to experience that because they genuinely enjoy playing with each other.
I think so, John. So let's say we are hoping for a tour in 2022. After over 200 shows, are there any songs you're chasing?
funny you say that. Before the River Tour started, the second River Tour, and by the way, I was in Dallas for that show where they had like millions of people on the stage. Like everybody got up on the stage at the end of the show. It was insane. I hadn't heard The Price You Pay and have been chasing that song forever. Again, like I said, in the past, when I was in college, The River had just come out, and I was in a triple when I was a freshman, and one of my roommates was a Bruce fan, and he'd go to bed every night with either side 3 or side 4 of The River playing. So went to bed a lot of nights listening to Fade Away and Stolen Car and Price You Pay. So Price You Pay was a song that I had never heard up until the first night in Pittsburgh on the second River Tour. So that was tremendous. On the River Tour in Philadelphia in September of that year, he went crazy at the end of that tour where he was playing. It was the River Tour where he was playing all the old songs when he came back to the United States. So he had played like 6 or 7 shows in a row where he did Incident into Rosalita. And so he did that the first night in Philly, and I wasn't at that show. I was at the second night, which it was like 100 degrees, and I was sick that night. And I was just standing there, and I was like, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. I'm finally going to hear these 2 songs back to back. And it was so hot, and it was on the set list that he went from Kitty's Back, which is tremendous. And that's where Incident was supposed to be. And then Rosie, and he went right into Rosie. Because again, it was really, really hot.
Yeah.
And I'm standing there, and I knew like that moment had passed. And I think that was the only time I was ever like pissed off at Bruce Show. I was like, I can't believe he just did it like 6 or 7 straight shows and he didn't play it. And I was like, this is probably the only chance I'm ever going to get to hear those 2 masterpieces back to back, in that segue. So that's what I'm chasing. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but I didn't think a lot of things were ever going to happen with these songs. I never thought I'd hear The Wish. I never thought, I would hear a lot of things that I've heard and been lucky enough to hear. So that was it. I would say County Fair would be the other one, which is just a simple.
I'd love to hear that one too.
I would love to hear that song. But those are really the only ones that I think I'm chasing at this point. There's so many songs that I have a friend there, like, how many times can you like hear Promised Land, or how many times can you hear? I'm like, as many times as he wants to play.
Exactly. Yeah. So I've told this story multiple times, but I was mad after the fact and more disappointed than mad. I was in Houston for the High Hopes tour, and talk about that, the experiences, because that was when there was a sign request for One Step Up, and he and the band played it even though they never rehearsed. But they came out and they played Seeds to begin with, and the story you hear afterwards is they were going to start with This Is Your Sword, which is a song that I really love from High Hopes, and supposedly Morello looked at him and go, "Hey, we're in Houston," and Bruce goes, "Yeah, okay." So they scratch out This Is Your Sword, they play Seeds, and what was the last time he was in Houston, he had opened with Seeds. So I was like, okay, I've already checked that one off. And now, so I'm getting another one that, and so after the fact, I was more disappointed than mad. But yeah, you go, sometimes the set list gets changed and you get a joy, and other times you go, oh well, that's what happens.
But I mean, there was a time where I never ever thought I was going to hear Real World on the piano. Yeah. And I was lucky enough to be in Asbury Park for one of the rehearsal shows for Devils and Dust.
Yeah.
And he played real, and there was just this hush in the crowd, like, oh my God, he's playing this. And it was just, I could care less when he played the rest of the night. It was just
exactly.
It was like, oh my, then the same thing happened in Cleveland on that tour. We drove to Cleveland from New York, and he played Stolen Car for the first time in I don't know how long, but it was on the piano.
Yeah.
And it was just like, Oh my God. So you never, and that's the joy, you know, you never
Yeah,
know. You could get lucky or you could, you know, but again, it's the whole experience. And sometimes the set list isn't as important as everybody makes it out to be.
right.
So, you know, it's the experience and it's the camaraderie and it's the people that you meet along the way.
Absolutely.
You know, and sharing that experience, whether it's family, whether it's friends, whether it's new people, whether it's people I've been in arenas where I don't know anybody, you know,
Right.
and it gets to a point where then you start seeing the same folks over and over, and you know, and you make lifelong friends. So it's all based on this music, which is nuts if you think about it. But
Absolutely.
God bless.
Absolutely. That is so good. So well said. Um, John, I've kept you over an hour. I so appreciate all your time. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I feel like we could talk another hour because we haven't even gotten into, you've mentioned a couple times, making friends and getting people, and I'm sure I could spend another hour just telling stories about people you've met and conversations you've had. And if you're
Absolutely.
willing, maybe we can do that. Maybe in 2022, we'll when we hear rumors of a tour, maybe I can have you back on and we'll talk some stories and we'll share about where we want to go and what shows are going to make too. Uh,
Absolutely.
but I gotta ask you the Mary question before we go. So, if you're a Johnny G fan and you're listening to this and you don't normally listen to Set Listing Bruce, first off, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation. Um,
Absolutely.
I end every episode with the Mary question. Jay Armstrong, who is an honors English teacher, recently retired, who's going to be on the show in a couple of weeks. He's got a new book to promote. Would spend his he would have his honors English class their senior year spend 2 days taking Thunder Road and breaking it apart as a poem. They would look at the imagery, they talk about the lyrics, they would talk about comparing to Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. And then at the end of the 2 days, Jay would ask his class, does Mary get in the car? So, Johnny, that's your question. Does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
Hell yeah. She not only gets in the car, we all get in the car. Thunder Road is the greatest song he ever wrote. In my opinion, like people are always like, what's your favorite song? And I go back and forth between Born to Run and Thunder Road and Backstreets, but Thunder Road, the lyrics to Thunder Road, these two lanes will take you anywhere has basically been the story of my life. Like I've traveled and lived in different places across the country because there's a lot of hope in that song. As he's always said, it's an invitation. And it is an invitation to, jump in the car and go for the ride. So if Mary didn't get in the car, she's nuts. But I think she got in the car. We've been in the car for 40 something years. And thank God the car's still running.
Well said, my friend. Well said. If someone wants to reach you, are you on social media?
I am on Twitter, but I follow folks. I don't really post.
Okay.
So I try to keep that a little bit more private.
Okay. All right. So if any final words you want to share?
I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of these stories and appreciate your time and what you're doing. I think, shedding light on the Bruce community is always a great thing. It is a great community across the world. And like I said, you could walk into any arena in any city and strike up a conversation with folks, and you never know, they could be friends for the rest of your life, which is always a great thing. And it's always a good thing to share Bruce stories. And I would love to come back on if you'd have me, as you said, as we 2022, hopefully we'll see each other out on the road somewhere, and look forward to it.
Sounds good. Let's hope for a 49ers Cowboys NFC championship game. And though I know the 49ers are struggling a little bit this
They're
year.
struggling, yep.
Yeah, but boy, that was some of the greatest that I know you can talk all you want about the Giants and the Washington football team and the Eagles, but in a lot of ways, boy, that 49ers Cowboy was something pretty special during the 80s and even the
Absolutely.
90s. Yeah,
Absolutely. That's when the 49ers arrived, when they could finally get past the Cowboys.
yeah,
Cowboys owned them for years,
yeah,
and then we had the catch, with Dwight Clark, rest in peace.
yes,
And that turned the tables for both organizations there for a little bit, and the 49ers went on their run.
yeah,
But yeah, a huge rivalry, and it's unfortunate that they don't play each other as much as they used to.
yeah, because it was always an interesting game. And my son will um we were at a Irish bar in New Orleans, and this was back when he was underage, but this was one of the places would allow kids to go in. And Danny O'Flaherty was the musician. He owned the bar, and someone asked for Danny Boy, and he went on a minor kind of rant about how that's not a true Irish song, that it was, English lyrics put on there, and it's not a true Irish ballad, and that a lot of people try to change. And so my son whispers and he goes, yeah, and a lot of people try to change it, that Joe Montana wasn't just throwing the ball away.
There you go. There you go.
and I just started laughing. Just this. Yeah, he was born in '89, so he is quick to tell you he is a Landry baby.
There you go.
So yeah. Johnny, thank you so much. This was so great. I appreciate it. Yes, I will reach out to you, and we will plan something in 2022 and have you back on again. For now, please stay safe. Please take care
Same
of
to you.
yourself.
Same to you.
Listeners, you go get vaccinated. Stay safe. Let's still do all the right things we need to do, because we need to get the band back on the road and see live music. So take
Absolutely.
care, be good, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.